The ground shifted, guys. Parts of northern Venezuela shifted by up to 60 centimeters. That's 2 feet sideways. Everything. Why? Because we had the doublet earthquake, first a 7.2 and then a 7.5. And I showed you the images of how crazy the ground was moving. And I'll show them to you again. They're behind me. So NASA just showed what happened under Venezuela. And I'm also showing you new videos, what's going on in Venezuela, while I tell you that this is worse than just the ground shaking, because the ground has actually really moved. And we're not talking about a small crack or a few inches. The new satellite map that just came out from NASA shows that parts of northern Venezuela shifted significantly. I said that much, 2 feet sideways. And the strongest displacement shows up near the same region where the destruction became so catastrophic, where these buildings, the towers, pancaked. Over 56,000 structures affected. Almost 1,000 towers came down and so many more damaged. La Guaira, Caracas, the northern coast, and the San Sebastián Fault zone. And this is the part I do not like when I have a closer look at that. And that's why I'm reporting about this to you, because this was not random shaking. This was the fault basically physically dragging the land sideways. And now we do have a satellite image that is showing the scar. And the map comes from NISAR, the NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar satellite. So this is not a normal photograph. I want to make that clear. This is basically radar looking at the ground before and after the earthquake, and then comparing the surface from space and measuring how much actually the land moved. So that technique is called InSAR. It can see deformation that the human eye cannot see from the ground. And what it found in Venezuela is basically a long deformation pattern that is running across the northern coast of Venezuela. The red areas that you see, they show where the ground moved east and up. Blue areas show where it moved west and down. But because this earthquake was strike-slip, like the San Andreas Fault, strike-slip, like that. And I want to show you the video again from the Myanmar earthquake, because there it was caught on camera what a strike-slip does. And I know I always say it with this video, watch the right area right off that gate, because there's so much going on. There's something collapsing in the left area. There's the concrete cracking. There's a tree coming down, I think a water tower. But watch the ground. Watch the ground displacement. And that's what's happening here, right? This earthquake was strike-slip. Most of that movement was horizontal, sideways. Two basically ground blocks slid past each other, like it was caught on camera in Myanmar. That's the first key point. This was not like a Chile-style subduction earthquake where one plate dives under another and lifts a huge section of the seafloor and then creates a tsunami. That's like Cascadia Fault style stuff, or Japan, something like this, Kamchatka. This was the Caribbean plate that was grinding past the South American plate. It's a transform boundary, right? The same seismic style of boundary, as I said, California San Andreas Fault. Two sides of the earth locked together for a long time, locked and loaded, and then suddenly slipping, what happened in Myanmar. And NASA says, right now, one section south of the rupture moved westwards by as much as 60 centimeters, 2 feet. And guys, that is not just a number that I'm telling you. I mean, imagine you have a road, a house foundation, a pipeline, a bridge approach, a hillside, or a row of buildings all sitting on ground that suddenly shifts almost 2 feet sideways. So now add violent shaking to that shift, right? Violent shaking like you see in the image behind me, where you also see like people on the ground, they can't even keep standing, but you also see the buildings coming down. This is a crazy video. And now add 2 major earthquakes, only 39 seconds apart. In addition to that, twice, 7.2, 39 seconds later, 7.5. And that is where that disaster has changed. I sometimes said from disaster to catastrophe. The 7.2 already was a disaster on its own, right? But then such a short amount, the 7.5. Many people did not experience this as 2 separate earthquakes. They experienced this as one terrifying sequence, and I don't blame them. A first shock, maybe they didn't even feel a pulse, and then the second, even stronger pulse. And that pulse hit while buildings, slopes, roads, and people were already moving and still shaking. And that's why that satellite map is so interesting and matters so much. It does not only show, yeah, there was an earthquake, Venezuela was shaking. It actually shows where the fault actually forced the surface to shift. So NASA's map shows a thin white band near Morón, where there was little surface displacement. So that white line marks roughly where the fault ruptured at depth. One side of that line, the ground moved away. On the other side, the ground moved basically another way. That is what strike-slip faulting looks like from space. 2 blocks sliding past each other. But now comes the dangerous part, so please pay attention, guys. NASA says the rupture propagated offshore towards the east and then came back onshore near the international airport of Caracas that was severely damaged in these earthquakes. So that means the break did not stay in one small area. It traveled. It moved along the fault system. It carried energy towards the east. And the east is where you find a dense coastal corridor, La Guaira, Catia La Mar, Caracas, and the damaged urban belt north of the capital, densely populated. And this is what I'm telling you now is what a lot of people do not take into consideration, because the epicenter where the quake happened alone really does not tell us everything. It doesn't tell the whole story so that we can get the whole picture. In a large earthquake, the direction of the rupture matters, right? If the fault breaks towards a populated area, the strongest shaking can be focused in that direction. And that's what it did here. It's called directivity. It was moving towards Caracas. It's like the earthquake energy gets pushed ahead of the breaking fault. So when we're wondering, and a lot of you ask that in the comments, how could places so far from the first epicenter be hit so hard? This is one of the answers. The rupture moved and the energy moved. The ground displacement pattern moved towards the region that later showed this catastrophic damage. The Trembler analysis says the first magnitude 7.2 released energy for about 32 seconds. Then there was a pause in moment release. Then the magnitude 7.5 began only a few kilometers, a few miles away, and lasted roughly 35 seconds. That's important because it supports the idea that this was not one simple clean crack, that it was a doublet earthquake. It's like 2 powerful fault patches basically breaking in sequence. And both had almost the same mechanism, near vertical, east-west, right lateral strike slip. That means if you stood on one side of the fault, the other side moved to the right, like in the Myanmar video, that was sideways tearing. The beach ball diagrams, the moment tensors, show the same thing. Both moment tensors point to strike slip movement, but remember, the beach ball does not show two real faults breaking at once, it shows us always two possible fault planes, right? One is the real rupture plane, the other is the auxiliary plane, basically a mathematical shadow of the real solution. So let's not simplify this into one quake moved forward, the other moved perfectly sideways. That's not proven. But what is proven already is absolutely terrifying enough. Both earthquakes were shallow, both were strike-slip, both struck almost on top of each other in time. And now the satellite data shows that the ground shifted sideways along that fault zone, permanently displaced. This is a permanent displacement. So now look at what that means for the buildings, right? Satellite damage mapping has flagged tens of thousands of buildings as damaged or destroyed near the affected areas. Not everyone collapsed, but the damage footprint that we see is enormous. Absolutely. And the worst hit zones line up with the places where the fault motion, the shaking, the soil condition, the slopes, and vulnerable buildings, where all of that came together to create that catastrophe. So where we see these horrible images of the collapsed towers in La Guaira, that area was not simply unlucky. We have to say that. Really, it was inside this corridor where the earthquake energy, the coastal ground conditions, and building vulnerability overlapped, right? And the NASA data that we're seeing, it's disturbing because there's a statement from NASA's Eric Fielding, geophysicist. He said, the InSAR results help explain why the damage in Caracas and La Guaira was so extreme. And that's a major statement because this means the scientists are not longer looking at only collapsed buildings from the outside. They really are reconstructing the underground motion that hit these buildings. Satellite is showing basically the fingerprints of that earthquakes, where the fault slipped, where the land moved east, where the land moved west, where the rupture passed offshore, and where it came back onshore, and where the displacement became the strongest. So the land is telling us the story of this disaster after the shaking stopped. So this Venezuela doublet, this double earthquake, is not a normal foreshock aftershock sequence, right? Only 39 seconds apart. This is a second major earthquake. Because if a second major pulse arrives before the first motion has even fully died, the structure is hit again while it's already stressed. That's why the videos are so violent and the destruction is so violent. So I hope you found that interesting, guys. I have other videos for you in the end screen. China was hit by violent tornadoes, crazy images. It was hit by flood, typhoon, second typhoon is coming, and a doublet earthquake as well. Not that as bad as in Venezuela, but still bad enough. So I'll put some videos in the end screen here. Interesting videos. Check it out. I'll see you in a second, guys. Stay safe. Bye-bye.